going on, everyone? I just wanted to talk really quickly. I know the hair's crazy. I was going to talk a little bit about something I was just thinking about. This is more of a self-post for whoever. But I was thinking about like what my priorities in life are. You know, trying not to virtue signal. And just intuitively what came to mind first was, well, number one thing, like if I was at a beauty pageant, because I'm a very handsome fellow, with a thick brow and whatever, Disney character eyebrows that don't move separately or something. The first thing I would ask for is, the first thing I would want to work on is figuring out a way that realist geopolitics don't create conflict. That's how anti-violence I am. Is like the thing that I want in this world isn't world peace. It's not propagating conflict and violence. Everyone says that's what we're doing. It's not. The second thing I thought about was that culturally and socially, systematically, being able to funnel resources into helping people who don't have as much, whatever that sort of Catholic social justice is, and sort of alongside that, continuing to funnel resources and skills into the space that's building sort of like a future sustainable economy. And so like these seem like sort of like they could be value-based things, but they're also somewhat far away from that, right? They're sort of far away from that. And if you sort of look at the motions of doing things and not stopping things and doing good things and figuring out a way to sort of work within like the various folds of how whatever that is could work, that's something that's powerful, I think. Very powerful. Very strong. I think we're supposed to do like funny voices and stuff so people listen to us. Act stupid. As stupid as possible. But yeah. I think there's sort of like two, like if we're doing like the new agey sort of, this is how like nonviolence stands up to other people, sort of like, our soft voice for this kind of shit. The thing I'd say is that this is very endemic of not understanding how like the global sort of, how like the climate of human civilization, like the actual materialist focal points as well as what goes into those. How does it actually change? How do we step into things? And when we talk about stepping into things, like it can even be something simple like understanding something better. Understanding something better. And I saw this on like an internet forum, and like there's like practical corollaries that kind of share tangible examples of how some of this stuff can work. And like, I'm not a historian. I would just imagine a really rich space. If you're interested in like this type of systemic stuff like I am, if you're interested in it, go do it, Just start there. Start with the thing you want to do. Be honest. Be honest. I would look at something like if we look at slavery in the United States and the quest for civil rights, like having a geographically dispersed and politically heterogeneous area in the United States, we should see that as something that was essential, right? Because if you left the South during like the antebellum era and you went north, what I would imagine you would find is that the level of political support, as well as like the reason for it, like when you have authentic values of whatever it is, liberalism, human freedom, like actually compassionate understanding or whatever it is in the real world, where it's like, yeah, this isn't even the conversation we should be having, then like, you can imagine that in a place like New York or Pennsylvania, these large areas, very wealthy, they were doing things that had never been done in the world. They were starting to get there, with the sort of level of control and urbanization that was occurring in the United States and the ability of capital and people to move places. You'd see that you could have these both values as well as political sentiments and political systems which sort of were able to either retract or push outward at any given time. I don't know if this is actually how that worked, or if you would find like, this is like when, like, if you want like the hardest statistical challenge ever, you're able to look at like the attitudes in New York City and the boroughs or something from 1800 to 1900, and you're able to see how various attitudes across the country from 20 or 10 or 50 years ago correlated with like actual policy decisions or actual like published, in a sense that's quantitative data for what people were voting for, like in sort of like the main, urban center. Like that stuff's always interesting. And so, like those mechanisms, this is like, sorry, a really long disconnected argument, but those mechanisms are always really hard to find if you're just like a normal dude like me or like anyone, and you're asking about how, when you're totally devoid of values, when you're like me, you have no emotions, no feelings except pain and suffering and whatever else it is. If you're like me like that, you look at something like realist competition or being able to build sort of these like justice-oriented, justice-producing, justice-sustaining sort of institutions within economies, within societies, within education, within, more formal like criminal justice systems, and within elected institutions and across governing bodies or appointed bodies that are supposed to be regulating, driving, stewarding this stuff. And it's really difficult to find these, like when we look at these almost temporal, that's a good one, like those, like these temporal sort of twists. And so I don't know if this, I was thinking about wrestling on my run today, whatever. I don't know if that's a thing, scary, but, there's this weird thing where if you put your arm up, this is a really vulnerable position, right? If you put your arm up, because why? Because anyone can come in and sort of like underhook your arm or something. And so the only way to sort of get down when you're reaching up to grab to something outside of like the plane is to use your whole body and almost your heel and be able to twist, and if you can see this, almost like chicken wing your arm in. Like that's like the safest defensive movement within this sort of position, but it's also not comprehensive because all you're telling the other person is that at the very least I'm able to return my body back to the starting position. Whether or not I go back out from it, why I'm doing it, why I'm choosing to do it or turn in a certain way, where I'm going to go to store leverage or tension, and sort of what, like maybe like more advanced, like what sort of like, ligamenture, I think, not musculature, but what sort of like motor reflex from ligaments as well as various other stimuli am I hoping to produce into, through, and after this movement, right? And so like that's really tough because when we're talking about actual politics and strategy and stuff, all that stuff is like, what do you call it? What was I going to say? I don't know. It's all just like really thick. You have to have a lot of faith, I would say, faith, trust, and belief that there's not such a thing as violence which isn't created, which is created on the level of societies and social selves, as Rousseau would say. I always go back to Rousseau. Love me some Rousseau in some ways. But this level of, cohesion into what we perceive to be natural targets for our values later in life. Everyone sees this and does this differently. And in a society, it appears to always be an extremely confusing thing when you have this persistent level of oppression and violence. A persistent level of oppression and violence. And, maybe this is a good way also for my Western mind to say something like, well, like, look, what I'm trying to understand, like, I'm not going to elect a politician to help Russia with Russia, but if I'm voting in the interests of the United States, I'm trying to actually properly place the scope and scale of our interactions and what they should be they have to be, whatever. Trying to remove some context out for simplicity, right? And like letting this get filled in. It's this almost weird idea that, what do we call it? What do we have to say? I don't want to vote for someone that if there is a path of conflict and violence, I don't want to vote for someone to see that keep going. I don't want to assume that it's the correct thing, especially on the societal scale, ever, given the first 2 points. But I also don't want leaders that are intentionally exacerbating that thing. And so we have to apply that principle sort of universally and globally as well. And then, like, to me, it seems intuitively, this changes those two sort of intuitive demands or wishes that I first wanted to share into the second thing, which is that, we need consistent, almost like civilizational guidelines that connect sort of the humanist aspects of development with like the sort of natural process and cyclical development of societies. I don't think that's that heady of an idea. I think there's really heady ways to get there. And I think there's lots of room within this for people to be themselves and to try and do lots of things. But I also don't think that there's like a need to like ever to say outright, well, like greed is good, like Gordon Gekko. War, there's such a thing as a just war. Why would we say that when there's multiple other strategies and planes we can operate in that are going to return something that is 100 times greater value? It returns something that's not based on necessity and sort of away from the Karl Marx's sort of notion of humans as creative or something, whatever you want to say. Like, just rejecting that a little bit, I would say, this is almost about a constrained pursuit that's looking for that creativity. I think Marx was, in Zizekian terms or something, Lacanian terms, I think Marx was closer to reaching for an object like something that's missing when he talks about human potential, creativity, this sort of fulfilling narrative that fits into sort of a materialist Hegelian sort of sense, lots of words. But I don't think it's acceptable to start there because it's not appreciating the first two fucking facts.